Hello, my name is Randy Williams, proud member of Keiretsu Forum, also the founder and CEO. In fact, I wear several hats. I'm also a general partner of our real estate and our technology sidecar top-off funds that have grown very well in the last couple of years. But Keiretsu Forum is 52 locations around the world. I'm also a chapter president here in Northern California. I'm very, very fortunate to have Roger Werne here in the studio today, and he's at Livermore National Lab. He's been a wonderful member for 7 years, but as he says, or I say, you know, we want to create adult supervision for these great science projects coming from the lab. So, Roger, welcome, and let's start at the top. Maybe go stay at 30,000 feet for a moment, talk about the history of the lab. Tell us about your title, your responsibilities, and also when the lab started here in America.
Well, thank you, Randy. It's my pleasure to be here. Okay, well, first of all, my name is Roger Werne, Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. I'm the Deputy Director of the Industrial Partnerships Office, the Innovation and Partnerships Office at Lawrence Livermore. Our name changed recently, that's why I said that. So Innovation and Partnerships. And our job is to take the technology that is developed by the laboratory in the course of its national security mission and pipeline that technology in the forms of patents out to the private sector so that they can acquire those patents, create products, start companies, and generate value for the U.S. economy.
So we and you are focused not only on one lab, but you have great synergies, all the labs in America. So how many labs are there? And let's do a history lesson for some obviously viewers who don't know the great responsibilities of our labs in America.
Well, there are 17 national labs, Department of Energy national labs. Livermore and Los Alamos and Sandia are what are called the National Nuclear Security Labs. Going back to 1943, the Manhattan Project was started at Los Alamos, led by Robert Oppenheimer, who was a Berkeley professor of physics. The purpose of the Manhattan Project was, of course, to create the atomic bomb. And the atomic bombs were dropped on Japan in 1945 to end World War II, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. After the war, during the Manhattan Project, Oppenheimer had a chief scientist named Edward Teller. After the bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Oppenheimer became something of a pacifist. And Teller was anything but a pacifist. Mm-hmm. Teller wanted to develop what he called the super, which was the hydrogen bomb. And and Oppenheimer did not want to do so. And that was essentially put on the shelf until in 1949, the Russians, the Soviets at the time, set off their first atomic bomb. That scared the tar out of the U.S. government because they didn't think the Soviets had the wherewithal to build an atomic bomb that fast. As it turns out, a scientist from Los Alamos named Klaus Fuchs, who was a British citizen, had actually given the plans for both Fat Man and Little Boy to the Russians, to the Soviets, and they were able to essentially build exact duplicates and set them off in a period of like 4 years. So, to make a longer story short, the United States decided it needed to develop the hydrogen bomb. So under Truman, Teller and E.O. Lawrence convinced Truman that they should do that. E.O. Lawrence was, again, a Berkeley professor of physics. And they convinced Truman that they should start a second laboratory whose purpose was to build a hydrogen bomb. That started at Livermore in 1952, and that has been our mission ever since. Our mission today is what's called the Stockpile Stewardship Program, and that is to maintain the nuclear weapons capability of the United States. Ourselves and the Russians now are slowly but surely downsizing the two stockpiles. At the end of the Cold War, the Russians had about 50,000 nuclear weapons and we had about 35,000. Today we're down to, both of us, less than 10,000, headed towards something around 11 or 1,200 by mutual agreement. So the disarming of the nuclear weapons capability of both countries is going forward. Now, as I said, the mission of the laboratory is to maintain the nuclear weapons capability of the United States. However, we do other things as well. We're involved with homeland security. We're involved with energy and environment. And so we essentially work on problems that are of a significant national security for the United States. And so our mission is to do the R&D necessary to implement national security policy.
Thank you, Roger. And then we're going to fast forward a moment and talk about the great projects that have come out of the lab that everybody knows. But why don't we go back to 1952? When the evolution of the lab get into the technology business? When did you evolve from security? Not that that's not still a mandate. When did that happen? Was that led by great scientists, or did Congress lead that charge?
That was actually there was the enabling law that allows Livermore to commercialize technology is called the Stevenson-Weidler Technology Transfer Act. And that was actually passed by Congress and signed by the President in the early 80s. And that gave the laboratories the right to take the intellectual property, the patents, and license those to the private sector. And so the idea being that the Congress wanted to be another benefit to come out of the weapons program other than just defense technology. They wanted to be able to take that defense technology, pipeline it to the private sector, and to create value for the U.S. economy. So now it is actually a legal requirement that all 17 national labs do technology transfer in order to take the technology and create extra value for having spent the money.
Okay, well, I want to speak about that, but let's go back to examples. Give us 2 or 3 examples that the viewers will readily know that emanated from the labs.
Yes. Okay, so I put together something called the Entrepreneurs Hall of Fame, and this was, it's a list of 19 people who developed their early careers at the laboratory and then came up with a technology and went into the private sector and commercialized that technology, and all became financially very successful. The first one I ran into was a gentleman named Robert Parker. And he was an expert in the weapons program. He was an engineer in the weapons program at Livermore. And he was an expert in plastics that change color with temperature, called thermochromic plastics. And he left Livermore and moved to Dublin and started Bob Parker Research. And his first successful product was a thermometer in which the numbers on the temperature change color with temperature. And so as the numbers would light up as the temperature went up or down. Well, so he made some money on that, but his first real hit was the mood ring. He actually designed and manufactured the mood ring and became very successful as a result of that. And his secondary product was a Duracell battery tester. And so that's at one end of the spectrum. Okay, the other end of the spectrum was a gentleman named Walter Scott, who teamed up with a Keiretsu member named Bob Tillman. And in the early 90s, Walter worked in the Star Wars program at Livermore in the late 80s and early 90s. And they reasoned that commercial satellite imagery would have commercial value. So they started a company called Worldview, which is today Digital Globe, stationed in Colorado. And Digital Globe provides the imagery for Google Earth. So those are kind of the 2 ends of the spectrum in terms of impacts Livermore's had. It's
great to see Bob Tillman at Keiretsu Forum meetings, but it's great to see him also some of your competition, which I saw and I experienced last week, led by you. We're going to talk about that, but there's a couple more I want you to bring up. Let's talk about security at the airport.
Okay, a lot of what Livermore does is what I'll call artificial intelligence and machine learning. And one of the things we're doing is we're developing technology having to do with if you ever look at an airport, when they x-ray your suitcase, when it goes through the thing, if you ever look at those x-rays, it's just a jumble of stuff. And the people who actually look at the screens, it's on a TV screen, they have to decide if there's anything in there that shouldn't be in there, like a gun or a knife or something like that. And so what we're doing in conjunction with a lot of the companies who build these things is developing techniques to identify what's in a suitcase given an x-ray from it. And so it's machine learning, artificial intelligence, and the like, and so that's going forward in a very strong way.
So the taxpayers of our great country have underwritten their tax dollars, obviously the labs around the United States, and the mission to commercialize and create, obviously, and execute in the marketplace to provide, obviously, great services and/or technology to the citizens of this country and throughout the world. How's that going? Tell us the mandate and tell us what you do, and we're going to talk about the competition, because I was a judge of your competition, and you had most of the labs there to compete with the great. I guess you had what, 9 labs?
We had 9 labs, correct.
Yeah. And so how's it going? How's the commercialization going? You know, give yourself, you know, a scorecard, you know, A through as
Well, if the measure of success is royalties from products that were created on Livermore technology, we Livermore are way ahead of everybody else. Okay, last year we made a little over $8.5 million in royalties. That represented about $300 million in sales of products with LLNL inside.
And that's recurring.
And that's recurring. That occurs year after year after year.
That hopefully will continue going up with the current, but obviously more will be embedded.
That's correct.
$8 million currently, okay?
That's right. That's right. Exactly right. And so that's the metric that counts, in my view, is royalties based upon sales. Sales of companies. The companies create jobs, and the jobs are a direct spin-off of Livermore technology, and that's something to be proud of.
Absolutely. Well, we think differently on the finance side, which is my ecosystem, and I love investing in the startup ecosystem. My wife and I have made 55 investments at Keiretsu Forum. Now the fund is even diversifying me even deeper. Probably I have, you know, interest, very small interest, over 200 companies now. But in regards to how do we invest in your companies? Tell us the process. And viewers watching this, how do they get involved? Is it easy getting involved with a great company from the lab? And tell us how the royalty works.
Okay.
I mean, how much you keep? How much do we get? Where does the capital come from? Obviously, I see a lot of the great scientists I've met. They're great grant writers. They have capital coming in. And it's nice to get them off that mother's milk into the real world. So tell us about the process.
Okay, so the process by which the laboratory transfers technology to the private sector is through a patent and a license. So an inventor in the course, and a scientist or an engineer in the course of their work, they come up with a new idea that is novel and new, and it is patentable. Okay, we evaluate it to see if, in fact, it is also commercially valuable. Because if it's not commercially valuable, it's probably not worth patenting, because patenting is expensive. And so we evaluate the novelty of an idea. We evaluate the commercial potential for the idea. If it looks like it's both novel and commercial, then we'll go forward and patent it.
And who has that empowerment to make those decisions?
My group does. Our group at Livermore.
And they have toes in all the world. I mean, they have toes in the generic marketplace.
We do market research.
Yeah.
So we have the people who actually negotiate the license are called business development executives, and we have 6 of those at Livermore. And when a decision is made to file a patent, it's written by patent counsel that work for the laboratory. So the decision is made to patent the technology. Once the decision is made to patent it, a patent is filed, and then we can begin to search for companies that might be interested in acquiring that patent. There's really 2 kinds of ways that companies that acquire patents. You can do an exclusive or a non-exclusive license. Okay, we negotiate the details of that. Most patents, in fact, virtually all patents, will come with a royalty rate. And a royalty rate is basically a percent of sales that they pay to the laboratory for the purpose of being able to license the technology.
And that can go from 2 to 8%?
Yeah, well, typically for our laboratory, it runs 2 to 5%. You know, in the case of some technologies, it may go higher, but we tend to be a little on the lower end of the patenting rate.
Because you want to induce.
That's right. We want to encourage
commercial.
We want to encourage commercialization of the technology, and especially for a startup company, the idea of paying royalties can be expensive to them, because you want to preserve the cash flow to keep it inside the company when a company is first getting started. So what we will frequently do is we will take equity in a company in lieu of royalties. At least for a portion of the royalty payments, we'll take equity, and in so doing, we essentially bet that the company is going to be successful. Right. That's our way of putting some skin in the game, so to speak. And then the company goes forward from there. Now, once they acquire the license, there's not much we can do in terms of further funding, because our our ability to affect what goes on essentially ends at the end of the license in a formal way. However, one of the things that we do is when I'll take our licensing companies and I'll introduce them to the Keiretsu Forum and say, okay, so the network in the Bay Area between Keiretsu and Band of Angels and the various venture capital firms is very rich in terms of possibilities. And so one of my jobs at the lab is to take these fledgling companies and introduce them to the Randy Williams and to the Larry Kellys of the Band of Angels and so on, and try to get a meeting of the minds between the two. And then if the Keiretsu investors are intrigued enough by the possibilities, by the potential of a company, then that's a win-win for all of us.
And one thing wonderful about Keiretsu Forum members, and we have over 360 members just in the Bay Area, is they also want to give back. They want to be mentors. So do you approach mentors in the marketplace to help these great science projects? In fact,
you were talking earlier about this thing we held called the National Lab Accelerator, and that's an example. So let me give you a sort of a rundown of what the accelerator was all about. Laboratory scientists, especially PhD level scientists, don't understand business very well at all. We know technology, we don't know business. The outside world knows business, but they don't know much about our technology. So let's get together and talk. That's how you and I first met 7 years ago. So the idea is that what we first want to do is we want to teach the lab scientists about the fundamentals of entrepreneurial business. And so in the case of Livermore, we actually have a class that is taught by UC Davis that you've participated in, and they come down, they spend a 3-day class teaching scientists and engineers the fundamentals of business, things like business models, things like value propositions, things like customer discovery, things like intellectual property, things like licensing, and all of the fundamentals that are necessary. And what happens over those few days is that I sort of jokingly say that a PhD level scientist, when they come into, they think the business world is trivial. Right? They think it's not very difficult at all, because when they were in school, they were working like hell and studying hard.
The rest of us are partying.
And the business people were partying, right? Therefore, it couldn't be that difficult. Right? Well,
that's clear.
They find that when they go through this business course and they hear people like yourselves talk about their experiences, when they hear success stories and failure stories, what they find is that it's a lot more sophisticated than they ever wanted, and they pick it up pretty quickly. So what we do then is we take them through this course, and then if they have an idea and a technology that they want to take forward and explore the business possibilities, we hook them up with a mentor. In the case of, you mentioned Bob Tillman. Bob Tillman hooked up with one of our young engineers named Bob Panis in this deal, and
autonomous vehicle,
right? And they made a technology that would help autonomous vehicles perform better, and over the period of months, when they meet, once a week or a couple times a month, the entrepreneur from the outside learns about the technology. The scientist inside learns about business, and together they develop a business pitch. Okay, we did this at 9 national labs. Okay, Livermore, Los Alamos, Sandia, Oak Ridge National Lab, Pacific Northwest Lab, and so on, Argonne, all the way back to Brookhaven National Lab in New York. Each one of those had a process in which they educated their scientists and engineers of the fundamentals of business, put on by a local university. They went through the mentoring process, and then they had what I'll call a local Shark Tank around their laboratory, in which business people came in, and typically the labs had somewhere between 5 and 10 pitches.
And you were the catalyst for all this?
Yes, that was my idea. Right.
Where'd you get this idea? Where'd you get all this?
I got it from you, actually.
Thank you. Got it. From us.
Yes,
our community.
From the Keiretsu community, exactly right. And so the idea was that
you are still a gracious Shark Tank, right?
That's exactly right.
We're trying to help and we're trying to nurture, but we're not that tough. Yes, when we write the check, we're tough. But yes, meanwhile, we want to educate.
It's the ladies and gentlemen Shark Tank.
Yes.
So anyway, the 9 national labs each had their local pitch competitions, and they had from between 5 and 10 pitches. From there, a winner was selected from each lab, and those winners came out here to actually Bishop Ranch in San Ramon, to the UC satellite campus, and you were one of the judges. And those 9 labs gave their pitches, 20-minute pitches and 10 minutes for Q&A, just like a Keiretsu Forum. And a winner was selected. And the winner from Livermore was Bob. The winner for the whole thing turned out to be Bob Panis. And so Livermore is fortunate in that respect because the competition between the labs was quite stiff.
Yes.
I mean, what was your impression of the technologies that you saw?
Wow, very impressive. And I especially liked our day, the prelude to this, when I just saw Livermore National Lab opportunities. And I also saw, and you know me, I like connecting.
Correct.
And I saw a couple companies, finally, I thought they got it. I said, oh yeah, we should be talking to that company. This is somewhat similar, but we can grow. Instead of 2 + 2 = 4, it's 2 + 2 = 6. So it's nice bringing everybody together. No, but I thought it was very impressive, and I obviously think you should continue. But in regards to competition, is it friendly competition? Or?
Yes. I mean, all the labs cooperate in this business because there's enough success to spread around. The reason why Livermore Lab is more successful at commercializing technology is because of our proximity to Silicon Valley. I mean, I got an email from one of my cohorts in another lab. He said he was very impressed with the number of angel investors and venture capitalists who showed up at this meeting we had a couple weeks ago. He said there's no way in the world we could attract a group of that size in our area because we're sort of out in the hinterlands.
Well, to your point, I met the gentleman, you recall his name, but at NASA, several months ago.
Right.
I had him invite someone who's at NASA to come speak to one of our large events where 500 of my angels gather, called the Angel Capital Expo in San Francisco, and he talked about obviously going to Mars and how we can bring that technology back to Earth, and really help obviously citizens in the United States. So I thought it was a very cool, obviously, talk.
Well, the real all national labs, whether they be DOE national labs or Army labs or NASA labs. Okay, in the course of doing missions for government purposes, technologies are developed that have commercial value, commercial potential. And it's my job to get that technology out the door into the hands of people like you who can create value out of it. And that's a win-win all the way around.
So, yeah, absolutely. So, does Congress create an ROI for you? Do they say, hey, you need to get more role? Okay, you are $8 million a year. We really want you to get up to $25 million. Are they actually saying that?
No, the answer is they don't say it explicitly like that.
Right.
But
as a business person, we would say it.
That's right. Absolutely right. That's absolutely right. And see, in many ways, the technology transfer business, I mean, it's not the primary mission of these labs. The primary mission is national security or it's science or something else.
Right.
And the technology transfer mission is important, but it's relatively small. For example, we are allowed to spend up to 0.5% of our budget on technology transfer. Okay, and in $1 billion laboratory, that's not chump change. So they enable us. We support within our office. We support 25 people. Okay, and so that's a reasonable sized group. So that shows that on the part of the Department of Energy and the congressional people who fund the Department of Energy, that shows a willingness to step out and be counted and to support the mission. Okay, but it's not the primary mission. Okay, it's an important, but
absolutely. Well, if you want to go down that particular vertical, which is critically important, obviously terrorist attacks are occurring daily throughout the world. Do you have any insight how we can start protecting our citizens in a better way through some of the great things that are happening in the labs?
Well, we at Livermore, and in fact many of the labs, do a lot of work for Homeland Security. And one of the things we do is, for example, I mentioned earlier, luggage inspection. We develop technologies that improve luggage inspection, so somebody doesn't put an unpleasant surprise in their handbag. We also do cargo container inspection. One of the big anxieties people have, or the government has, is that around the world there are about 7 or 8 million cargo containers that come into the United States every year. And so we want to make sure that there's not an unpleasant surprise inside one of those cargo containers. So for example, we develop detection systems that detect radioactivity to see if there's any traces of radioactivity in some of these cargo containers. There was a technology that developed at Livermore that was actually installed at a place called Otay Mesa in Southern California on the San Diego border. And it would actually, trucks from Mexico come into the United States, and they drive through a radiation sensor portal.
Nice.
Okay, and those radiation sensors look for anything anomalous. And if they find something anomalous, like a small radiation signature, they stop the truck and inspect it. Okay, and then the same's true with ships. You know, there are ways to inspect ships. There are ways to another unpleasant surprise is somebody sneaking in a bio threat of some kind, and so we have detectors that you can put that we've developed at Livermore that have been deployed to actually sniff, for instance, sniffing the mail for anthrax. That was actually done by a Livermore technology, and the mail is, you know, looking for anthrax letters. So we actually have that technology that was commercialized by a company here locally called Cefied. It was founded by a Livermore engineer, and they actually make technology which sniffs the mail for anthrax and other agents.
Anything that we should be, I mean, obviously we have individual terrorists out there, and then we have obviously ISIS, and as you said, containers. I mean, how can we stop, you know, individual bomber?
In my opinion, it's almost impossible.
Yeah.
Because, you know, short of turning this into a police state, the bad guys will always have an advantage on a small scale. On a big scale, they almost always leave a trace or a signature that can be identified. But on a small one-on-one scale, it's almost impossible.
Well, turning to levity now, which is important because balance of life is critically important. Are you still coaching?
Oh, yes.
So
yes.
Roger coaches pole vaulting at San Ramon High. Tell us the joy of that.
Oh, well, I pole vaulted in high school and college. I went to San Jose State back in the days when San Jose State was the powerhouse in track and field.
Did you get over 16?
No, I got close, but I never got to 16. That was 52 years ago, so that's a while back. So anyway, so I started pole vaulting again. I went through my middle-age crazy at age 40. You know, I had a midlife crisis. I decided I wanted to recapture my youth, and I started pole vaulting again. And I coach at San Ramon High in Danville. I've been there for this is my 34th year. And so I still compete in masters track and field.
Right.
And it's my hobby.
Great.
It's my hobby.
Well, we only have 1 minute left. What have you learned at Keiretsu Forum last 7 years?
The sophistication of business. So when I first got into this area, I was like the scientist I talked about earlier. You know, business must be easy because all the guys were playing in college.
Right.
Well, I have found, you know, through working with you and other Keiretsu members, that it is a much more sophisticated and difficult business than I had ever envisioned.
Yes.
But it's also very exciting.
Well, what we try to do, I call it swarm intelligence, you know, enjoying the mind share of community. I started Keiretsu Forum because I needed smarter people around me that could help me and others invest correctly and carefully. And have you enjoyed that swarm intelligence?
Oh, absolutely.
A lot of friends?
Absolutely. Going to my monthly Keiretsu meeting is one of the most interesting things I do each month.
Great. We call it Health Club for the Mind.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Roger Werne, for being here, and thank you, viewers, for your valuable time today.